Writing. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations as people settled into their seats, expecting another routine divorce hearing between two wealthy individuals. Reporters filled the back rows, hoping for a few dramatic quotes before moving on to the next story. At exactly 9 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened, and everyone stood as Judge Elena Morales entered. She was respected for her fairness and known for making decisions based only on facts, never on wealth or influence. On one side of the room sat Alejandro Salazar, one of the city's most successful businessmen. His tailored suit, expensive watch, and calm expression reflected a man who had spent years building an empire. His legal team surrounded him with thick folders and confident smiles. They believed the case was already won. Across the aisle sat his wife of 15 years, Valeria. She wore a simple navy blue dress and carried only a small leather folder. There were no assistants beside her, no expensive jewelry, and no sign of fear on her face. She quietly folded her hands and looked toward the judge. Many people whispered that she looked defeated. After all, Alejandro controlled billions in assets, and rumors claimed he had carefully arranged his finances long before filing for divorce. According to newspapers, Valeria would leave the marriage with almost nothing. Judge Morales adjusted her glasses and began reviewing the case. Mr. Salazar has petitioned for dissolution of the marriage based on irreconcilable differences. Both parties have submitted financial disclosures. Unless new evidence is presented, this court is prepared to conclude today's proceedings. Alejandro nodded confidently. His attorney stood and delivered a polished summary, explaining that most of Alejandro's fortune had been generated through business ventures personally directed by him. Although Valeria had been a supportive spouse, the lawyer argued, she had no legal claim to the majority of the company. Every sentence sounded rehearsed. Every document seemed carefully prepared. When the attorney finished, the judge turned toward Valeria. Mrs. Salazar, do you wish to respond? She slowly rose from her chair. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. Yes, Your Honor. Before this court reaches a final decision, I would like permission to submit one document. The lead attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, the discovery period has already closed. Any new evidence should be excluded. The judge looked toward Valeria. What kind of document is it? It is an agreement signed by both of us on our wedding day. The courtroom fell completely silent. Alejandro frowned for the first time that morning. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. His lawyer simply shook his head, clearly unaware of what Valeria was referring to. Judge Morales considered the request. I will allow the court to examine the document before ruling on its admissibility. Valeria carefully opened the worn leather folder she had carried into court. From inside, she removed an old cream-colored envelope with slightly faded edges. It looked as though it had been protected for many years. She approached the bench and handed it to the judge. The courtroom watched every movement. Judge Morales opened the envelope with great care. Inside rested several neatly folded pages bearing signatures, official stamps, and a notary seal. She began reading silently. As the seconds passed, her expression slowly changed. Alejandro noticed. For the first time in years, uncertainty crossed his face. His attorney requested permission to inspect the document. After reading only the first page, his confidence disappeared. This cannot be correct. Valeria remained calm. It is the original copy. The judge looked directly at Alejandro. Mr. Salazar, is this your signature? Alejandro stared at the page. His eyes widened. He recognized every stroke of the pen. It looks like my signature. Did you sign this agreement before your marriage? He hesitated. I honestly don't remember. Those words surprised everyone. 15 years earlier, Alejandro had not been rich. He had been an ambitious young architect with enormous dreams and overwhelming debt. Banks had rejected his loan applications, investors laughed at his business proposal, and even close friends advised him to abandon his plans. Only one person believed in him. Valeria. She had recently inherited a modest apartment from her late parents. Instead of keeping it as security for their future, she sold it and invested every cent into Alejandro's first office. When suppliers demanded payment, she worked overtime as an accountant. When payroll became impossible, she quietly postponed buying new clothes so employees could receive their salaries. She never complained. She simply believed in the man she loved. During those difficult years, they often worked together until midnight in a tiny office with broken furniture and flickering lights. They dreamed about building a better future together. One rainy evening, shortly before their wedding, Alejandro had become emotional. If this company ever succeeds, he told her, "It will only be because you carried me when I couldn't stand on my own." Valeria smiled. "We're building it together." That same evening, at the recommendation of Alejandro's elderly mentor, they visited a family attorney. The lawyer suggested creating a written agreement, not to protect wealth they didn't have, but to protect fairness if success ever changed their lives. Alejandro laughed at the idea. "What fortune? We can barely pay rent." The attorney smiled knowingly. Sometimes people forget who helped them once success arrives. Alejandro took the pen without hesitation. "I'll never forget." He signed first. Valeria signed beside him. 2 witnesses observed everything. The document was officially notarized. Back in the courtroom, Judge Morales finished reading the final page. She slowly removed her glasses and looked directly at both parties. "This agreement appears legally executed." Alejandro's attorney quickly interrupted. "Your Honor, we request an immediate recess to verify its authenticity." The judge nodded. "So ordered." As everyone prepared to leave the courtroom for the short recess, Alejandro remained frozen in his chair, unable to take his eyes off the faded signatures that had suddenly returned from the past. The promise he had made on the day he married Valeria had just walked back into his life, and it threatened to change everything. Writing. When the court reconvened 30 minutes later, the atmosphere had completely changed. The confidence that had filled Alejandro's side of the courtroom had disappeared. His attorneys spoke quietly among themselves, flipping through legal books and making hurried phone calls. Across the room, Valeria remained exactly as she had been before the recess, calm, composed, and silent. Judge Elena Morales entered and took her seat. "The court has received confirmation from the notary's office," she announced. "The agreement presented by Mrs. Salazar is authentic. It was legally executed 15 years ago and has remained on official record since that date." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Alejandro lowered his head. Every memory he had buried beneath years of success came rushing back. He remembered the tiny apartment they had once shared, the evenings when Valeria encouraged him after investors rejected his ideas, and the countless sacrifices she made without asking for anything in return. She had believed in him long before. Magazines called him a genius or business leaders invited him to exclusive events. His attorney stood once more. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the authenticity of the document, we argue that circumstances have changed significantly. Mr. Salazar built his company through years of hard work." Judge Morales nodded. "No one disputes his hard work. However, the agreement specifically recognizes the value of sacrifices made by a spouse who gives up personal opportunities to support the family's success." She turned toward Valeria. "Mrs. Salazar, would you like to tell the court about those sacrifices?" Valeria stood slowly. "I never wanted recognition," she began softly. "When Alejandro started his company, I believed in his dream because I believed in him. I sold my parents' apartment to help him open his first office. I worked double shifts so he could keep his employees. After our children were born, I left my own career because one of us needed to stay home. Every decision I made was for our family." Her voice never trembled. "I never asked to own his success. I only hoped we would enjoy it together." The courtroom remained silent. She continued. "But as the years passed, success changed everything. Business dinners replaced family dinners. Vacations became board meetings. Eventually, I became invisible in my own marriage." Alejandro closed his eyes. Every word was true. He remembered promising his children that he would attend school events, only to cancel at the last minute. He remembered anniversaries forgotten because another contract seemed more important. Most painfully, he remembered the day he told Valeria he wanted a divorce, believing money could settle everything. He had expected anger. Instead, she had simply nodded. Now he finally understood why. She had never needed revenge. She had only trusted the promise he had once made. The judge reviewed the final pages of the agreement. "The language is clear," she said. Both parties agreed that if one spouse sacrificed career opportunities to support the family's financial future, those contributions would carry equal value should the marriage end. She paused before delivering her decision. "This court recognizes that wealth is not created by financial investment alone. It is also built through emotional support, unpaid labor, personal sacrifice, and unwavering belief during times when success is uncertain." She looked directly at Alejandro. "Without Mrs. Salazar's contributions, this company may never have existed." The ruling was announced. Valeria would receive an equal share of the marital assets covered under the agreement, along with ownership interests that reflected the partnership they had created from the very beginning. Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Some reporters immediately rushed outside to file breaking news. Alejandro remained seated. For the first time in years, money no longer seemed important. He quietly stood and walked toward Valeria after the hearing ended. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She looked at him with kindness rather than anger. "I spent years waiting to hear those words. I forgot who stood beside me when I had nothing." "You didn't just forget," she replied gently. "You stopped seeing me." He lowered his eyes, unable to answer. Weeks later, newspapers described the case as one of the most remarkable divorce rulings in recent memory. But the headlines focused only on the millions involved. They missed the real story. Valeria used much of her settlement to establish a foundation that helped spouses who had sacrificed careers to support their families rebuild independent lives through education, business grants, and legal assistance. She refused television interviews and avoided public attention. "The work matters more than my story," she told those who asked. Alejandro, meanwhile, stepped away from the relentless pace of business. He spent more time with his children and quietly funded scholarships for young entrepreneurs, always insisting that applicants recognize the people who supported them behind the scenes. Months later, he published a short letter. It contained only a few sentences. "I spent years believing I built my success alone. I was wrong. The strongest foundations are often laid by hands that never receive applause. Never wait until you lose someone to appreciate everything they quietly gave you." The letter spread across social media, touching millions of readers. Some called it a confession. Others called it redemption. Valeria never commented publicly. She had already found something more valuable than victory in court. She had recovered her dignity, honored every sacrifice she had made, and proved that true partnership cannot be erased by wealth or forgotten by time. The signed agreement had changed the outcome of the divorce, but it also reminded everyone in that courtroom of a truth that money could never rewrite. The greatest fortunes are rarely built by one person alone, and the deepest promises should never be forgotten once success finally arrives.